Chapter 11. New Empires and Kingdoms. Learning Objectives. Gupta Dynasty, Samudragupta's Dynasty, Life of the Ordinary People in the Kingdoms, Administration of Kingdoms, Assemblies of Southern Kingdoms. Gupta Dynasty. Samudragupta was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty. Samudragupta's father Chandragupta was the first ruler of Gupta dynasty to adopt the grand title of Maharaja Adhiraja, while his great-grandfather and grandfather are mentioned simply as Maharajas. Samudragupta's mother Kumara Devi belonged to the Lichavi Ghana. Gupta dynasty began about 1700 years ago. We know about Samudragupta from a long inscription, a poem in Sanskrit composed by his court poet Harisena. This was inscribed on the Ashoka's pillar at Allahabad. This inscription is of a special kind known as a prashasti, a Sanskrit word meaning in praise of. Facts. The title given to kings according to importance were Raja, Maharaja and Maharaja Adhiraja. Samudragupta's Prashasti. The poet praised the king in glowing terms, as a warrior, as a king who won victories in battles, who was learned and a great poet. He is also described the king as equal to the god. The following Prashasti describes Samudragupta as a great warrior, whose body was most charming, being covered with a plenteous beauty of the marks of hundreds of scars caused by battle axes, arrows, spikes, spears, barbed darts, swords, iron clubs, javelins, barbed arrows, long arrows and many other weapons. Look at the map overleaf. It shows important cities and kingdoms of that period. Harisena described 4 different kinds of rulers and about Samudragupta's policy towards them. Number 1. In the Aryavarta, there were 9 rulers who were uprooted and their kingdoms were made a part of Samudragupta's empire. Number 2. In the Dakshinapatha, there were 12 rulers, some of whose capitals are marked with red dots on the map. They surrendered to Samudragupta after being defeated and then he allowed them to rule again. Number 3. The ruler of the inner circle of the neighboring states including Assam, coastal Bengal, Nepal and a number of Ghana, Sanghas in the northwest bought tributes, followed his orders and attended his court. Number 4. The rulers of the overlaying areas, perhaps the descendants of the Kushanas and Shakas, and the ruler of Sri Lanka submitted to him and offered daughters for marriage. Some other qualities of Samudragupta are shown in coins where he is shown playing the veena. Some of the important centers of the Gupta ruler were Prayag, the old name for Allahabad, Ujjain and Patliputra, Patna. Samudragupta figures among the later rulers of the Gupta dynasty such as his son Chandragupta too. We know about him from inscriptions and coins. He led an expedition to western India where he defeated the last ruler of the Shakas. It is believed that his court was full of learned people including Kalidas, the poet, and Aryabhat, the astronomer. Harshvardhana. Harsh was not the eldest son of his father but became king of Thaneshwar after the death of his father and elder brother. His brother-in-law was the ruler of Kannauj and was killed by the ruler of Bengal. Harsh took over the kingdom of Kannauj and then led an army against the ruler of Bengal. Although he was successful in the east and conquered both Magadh and Bengal, he was not as successful elsewhere. He tried to cross the Narmada to march into the Deccan but was stopped by the ruler belonging to the Chalukya dynasty, Pulkeshin II. We can find out about Harshvardhan from his biography written by Banabhatta called Harishchandra in Sanskrit. He ruled nearly 1400 years ago. Xuanzang, about whom you have read in the previous chapter, also spent a lot of time at Harsh's court and left a detailed account of what he saw. The Pallavas and Chalukyas. The Pallavas and Chalukyas were the most important ruling dynasty in South India during this period. The kingdom of the Pallavas spread from the region around their capital Kanchipuram to the Kaveri Delta, while that of the Chalukya were centered around the Raichur Dayob between the rivers Krishna and Tungabhadra. The capital of Chalukyas was Aihole. It was an important trading center. It also developed as a religious center with a number of temples. The most famous Chalukya ruler was Pulkeshin II. We know about him from a prashasti composed by his court poet Ravi Kirti. Pulkeshin got the kingdom from his uncle. He led expedition along both the west and the east coast. Besides, he checked the advance of Harshad. Pulkeshin also attacked the Pallava king, who took shelter behind the walls of Kanchipuram. Ultimately, both the Pallavas and Chalukyas gave way to new rulers belonging to the Rakshtakutta and Chola dynasties. Administration of kingdoms. As in the case of earlier kings, land revenue system remained important for these kings also. But there were some new developments as well. Kings tried to win the support of men who were economically and socially powerful because of their political and military strength. Some new developments were as follows. Number 1. Some important administrative posts were now hereditary. For example, the poet Harishana was a Mahadanta Nayaka or chief judicial officer like his father. Number 2. Sometimes one person held many offices. For instance, Harishana, besides being a Mahadanta Nayaka, was also a Kumar Amatya, an important minister, and a Sandhi Vigrahika, a minister of war and peace. Number 3. Some important men such as the Nagashreshthi, chief banker or merchant of the city, the Sarthavaha, leader of the merchant caravans, the Prathama Kulika, chief craftsman, and the head of the Kayats, scribes, had a say in local administration. Assemblies in the southern kingdoms. The inscriptions of the Pallavas mention a number of local assemblies. These include the Sabha, an assembly of Brahmin landowners, Ur, an assembly of non-Brahmin landowners, and the Nagaram, an organization of merchants. The Sabha functioned through the subcontinent, which looked after irrigation, agriculture operations, making roads, local temples, etc. It is likely that these assemblies were controlled by rich and powerful landowners and merchants. Many of these local assemblies continued to function for centuries. Army. Like earlier kings, some of these kings maintained a well-organized army with elephant, chariots, cavalry, and foot soldiers. Besides, there were military leaders who provided the king with troops whenever he needed them. They were not paid regular salaries. Instead, some of them received grants of land. They collected revenue from the land and used this to maintain soldiers and horses and provide equipment for warfare. These men were known as Samanthas. These Samanthas sometimes tried to become independent ruler whenever the ruler was weak. Banbhatta has given a vivid picture of the king's army on the move. The king travelled with an enormous amount of equipment. Apart from weapons, there were things of daily use such as pots, pans, furniture, golden footstools, food including animals such as goats, deers, rabbits, vegetables, spices carried on carts or loaded on to pack animals such as camels and elephants. This huge army was accomplished by musicians beating drums and other playing horns and trumpets. Villagers had to provide hospitality along the way. They came with gifts of curds, gur, and flowers and provided fodder for the animals. They also tried to meet the king and place their complaints and petitions before him. The army left a trail of destruction behind. Elephants often trampled down the hunts of villagers, and the oxen yoked to the caravans of merchants ran away scared by the tumult. As Banbhatta says, the whole world was swallowed up in dust. Life of the ordinary people in the kingdoms. The Chinese pilgrim Fa Zian noticed the miseries of those who were treated as untouchables by the high class. These were expected to live on the outskirts of the city. He writes, "If such a man enters a town or a marketplace, he strikes a piece of wood in order to keep himself separate. People hearing this sound know what it means and avoid touching him or brushing against him." We can also have a glimpse of the lives of ordinary people from plays and other accounts. Kalidas is known for his plays depicting the life of the king's court. In these plays, the king and most Brahmins are shown as speaking Sanskrit, while other men and women used Prakrit. His most famous play, Abhijana Shakuntalam, is the story of the love between a king named Dushayatna and Shakuntala. In this play, an interesting description of the plight of a poor fisherman is given. The fisherman found a precious ring which the king had given to Shakuntala, but which had been accidentally swallowed by a fish when he went to the palace with it. The gateman accused him of theft and the chief police officer was rather rude. However, the king was happy when he saw the ring and sent a reward to the fisherman. Then the police officer and the gateman decided to take a share of the reward and went along with the fisherman to have a drink. It shows the cruel and unfair treatment of the king's employees with the ordinary people. Words to know. Prashasti, a Sanskrit word meaning in praise of. Biography, life history of some famous person. Mahadanda Nayaka, Chief Judicial Officer. Kumar Amataya, important minister. Sandhi Vigrahika, a minister of war and peace. Sabha, assembly of Brahmin landowners. Ur, assembly of non-Brahmin landowners. Nagaram, organization of merchants. Samantas, military leaders who granted and provided the king with troops in need. Points to know. Samudragupta was a famous ruler of the Gupta dynasty. His father Chandragupta was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty to adopt the title of Maharaja Adhiraja. His court poet Harishana has mentioned him a great warrior in his Prashasti inscribed on the Ashokan pillar at Allahabad. According to Harishana, Samudragupta ruled a large area directly or indirectly. Some of the important centers of the Gupta rulers were Prayag, Ujjain and Patliputra. Samudragupta's court was filled with learned people like Kalidas and Aryabhatta. Harshvardhan became the king of Thaneshwar. He also took over the kingdom of Kannauj and led an army against the ruler of Bengal. But he was stopped by the Chalukya king Pulkesin II while trying to cross the Narmada towards the Deccan. Banabhatta has written Harsha's biography called Harsha Charita. The Pallavas and Chalukyas were the most important ruling dynasty in South India during this period. The most famous Chalukya ruler was Pulkesin II. We know about him from the Prashasti composed by his poet Ravi Kirti. In these kingdoms, some important administrative posts used to be hereditary. Sometime a powerful man held more than one important post. In the southern kingdoms, local assemblies such as Sabha or Nagaram were assigned some important functions. Besides the king army, some military leaders also provided the king with troops. These leaders were given land. They collected revenue from the land to maintain soldiers. The life of the ordinary people, especially untouchables, were miserable. The attitude of the government employees was harsh towards. Chapter 12